We never know when a crisis may strike our church or community. So the question is, are we prepared to lead our church through that crisis? In this episode, I'm joined by Rusty George. Rusty is the lead pastor of Real Life Church, a multi-site church with campuses throughout Southern California. Now, Rusty's church is making a great kingdom impact, but they've also had their share of crises, including the suicide of a staff pastor and a school shooting in their community. So Rusty shares some of the lessons that he has learned and some of the things that he wishes he would have known before they experienced crisis. And together, Rusty and I talk about some of the ways that we can minister in the midst of these crises. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of FrontStage BackStage. I'm your host, Jason Daye, and I have the privilege of every single week sitting down with a trusted ministry leader and diving into a topic to help pastors, ministry leaders just like you embrace a healthy, sustainable rhythm for both ministry and life, both on the front stage and backstage of your life. And we do not just do a show, but we create an entire resource around this show to help you dig more deeply. And you can find that at pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find a toolkit with all types of resources, including a ministry leader's growth guide to give you some questions to reflect upon, some key insights from our conversation today. So be sure to check that out at pastorserve.org/network. Now, if you're joining us on YouTube, take a moment to give us a like and take a moment to drop your name and the name of your church in the comments below. We love to get to know our audience better. We'd love to have the opportunity to pray for you and for your ministry. So be sure to do that. And then whether you're joining us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, please be sure to follow or subscribe so you do not miss out on any of these great conversations. And like I said, I'm very excited for today's conversation, and I'd like to introduce to you Rusty George. Rusty, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. It is an honor to be with you and all of your listeners.
Yeah, brother, so good to be together and to have a time to connect again. Now, Rusty, as a lead pastor of a vibrant, growing church, you've experienced your share of crises. And some of the crises that you've encountered, most would consider pretty major, right?
Mhm.
And not that we want to dive into all of them, but just sort of as a way to set, the stage for the rest of our conversation, Rusty. Can you share a bit about some of the crises that you've helped lead your church through?
Absolutely. For the first 10 years I was here, we kind of prided ourselves in the fact that we were a no drama place. Everything was up and to the right, everything was great. And we moved in a building. The moment we moved in the building, two things happened. One, we exploded in growth and we thought, boy, we have got the secret sauce. God is on our side. Everything's going great. And I remember hearing a seasoned, very successful pastor tell me soon after that, you're going to see some stuff. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, anytime you take ground for the kingdom of God, the enemy takes notice. And that is exactly what happened. Over the course of about 5 to 7 years, we had just a barrage of strange, awful, and crazy situations. We had an attempted coup d'etat of staff members who didn't like the new staff members that came in post building, and they were pre-building, and they didn't like getting so big, and they tried to take a lot of people and start their own church, and that failed. But it was crisis. We had a staff member go home to do a wedding, and when he got there, he was arrested for a crime he had committed years prior. And as a result, even though that happened in another state, it made our news about every day for the next several months. We had a couple of moral failures that happened on staff that led to the suicide of two individuals. That was a devastating thing to walk through and to deal with our staff, to deal with those families left behind, and to deal with a congregation wondering why, how did this happen? And then we had a school shooting happen in our community that just rocked our community, killed one of our students from our church, and really forced us to have to step up as the kind of the counselor for our community, which was a wonderful opportunity for us, but also a very difficult thing for our staff and the families of the victims, and just people in our congregation wondering how could God let this happen. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, but those are the high level ones that come to mind. And as a result, it forced us to have to deal with crisis. And the saying that we've always heard is you're either in a crisis or headed towards one. And we found ourselves in a series of them. And you have to learn a lot about how do we deal with our staff? How do we deal with our congregation? How do we deal with the community? And how do I deal with myself? Because internally, I was beginning to become a wreck. I was beginning to think, boy, what am I doing wrong? Have I brought this scourge upon us? Is there unconfessed sin in the camp? Why is this happening? Am I just destined to be Jeremiah, the weeping prophet? Is that what my lot in life is? And I began to learn a lot of key things through that, a lot of mistakes we made, things I'd do differently, and some things we got right. Along the way, we had some people in our church that worked for PR companies help us out with how to deal with the press to the point where now we're able to leverage the press to our benefit rather than just react to their questions to us. A lot of different things, but overall, in the last 10 years, we've learned a lot about how to deal and manage with crisis.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And Rusty, as I've known you for several years and have kind of seen some of these things and seen you and your church navigate them, it's one of those fascinating experiences to face crisis, to work through crisis, but then to see how God takes even those things that were meant for ill, and redeems them in some unique ways. And I know you've experienced that. You've shared that. But Rusty, I've got to ask one question. Whenever you launched into ministry, right, fresh faced, ready to win the world for Jesus,
Right.
did you? I mean, was this idea of your church having crisis? Was that even on your radar as you entered into ministry?
No, not at all. Now, I wasn't immune to it. Here's what I mean by that. I grew up in a church that had a lot of crisis. We had a string of about 2 to 3 pastors in a row that had multiple affairs, stole from the offering, that kind of stuff. This back in the glory days of the 70s and 80s when that was going on a lot, but nobody knew about it because there's no social media.
Right.
And so I watched just as my parents navigated that. And what I saw with them is we never left the church. We didn't go church shopping. We were committed to the people that were there as pastors would come and go, as scandals would come and go. I was so impressed. I didn't even know it at the time, but we didn't leave. And I think that did a couple things for me as I got into ministry. One, I assumed that there might be some difficult road ahead, nothing like what we've experienced, but I assumed there might be something. But I assumed I could control it if I didn't make the mistake. And so, what I saw from in my parents' church and my church was the pastor made the mistake. And I thought, well, if I keep my nose clean, then everything will be fine. And I feel like I've done that. But there's still other people. And as somebody once told me, if Satan can't get to you, he'll get to your staff. And I think that's what began to happen. Certainly in a rapid growing church that's dealing with unchurched people, uh, this is kind of the way it works. You see someone come to Christ, they have an incredible testimony, and you hire them. Well, that's a really cool story, but now you have put them in the vice of ministry, and whatever's in them is going to come out of them. And oftentimes their sanctification hasn't caught up with their justification. And so we had a lot of that going on where people were not equipped to deal with the pressures of ministry, and the enemy got them. So I had that learning as far as it was possible, but I thought maybe I could avoid it, which I can't. And then the other side of it was I assumed that everybody stayed.
Mm.
My parents stayed. And maybe that was just our Midwestern values, but out here in California, people are pretty flippant with their loyalty. And they just, that's why everybody shows up to Laker games 15 minutes late and they don't come if we're losing because they just, whatever. And I was really surprised the people that left me during some of our most difficult times because they thought, I don't want to deal with this drama. That really hurt. And we deal with that in this course we'll mention later. But I think, out of all the highs and lows in ministry, one of the toughest things was the people I thought would walk with me through it. Some of them didn't. And when you have that happen, that really makes you feel alone.
Yeah, I imagine, because you're not only facing a crisis, but then those who you maybe expected to help face that crisis with you step
Right.
away. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Russ, I know you're not a doom and gloom guy. So yeah, I mean, you're a kingdom guy. You're a passionate pastor. You're a hope-filled leader, and, and do you sense that, because you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but do you sense that, it's not a matter of when, it's a matter, or not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it comes to crisis? Like, is every church going to experience crisis to some degree?
Yes, because there's people involved. Let's say you're a church that's not advancing the gospel, you're just taking care of a holy huddle until Jesus returns. Even in that element, you're going to have people that just go through the trials of life. It could be, cancer. It could be a struggle in their family. Yeah, but nowadays, I think what we're seeing is the churches that are watching this podcast, the churches that are trying to get better, they're trying to advance the kingdom of God. And when you do that, boy, you really do you kind of wave your arms at the enemy and say, over here. And what happens is you do see a lot of lost people show up, but they bring a lot of baggage with them, which is great. We're there to serve them and to help them. But it does create some of the difficulties that you have to navigate. For instance, we had a guy show up at church one day wearing knives all over his belt, just dangling off of his belt. One of our security guys starts talking to him, and come to find out, his wife, who attended church there, had an affair, and he was showing up to take care of her and her lover. It's just, do I want those people to come to church? Sure, but they bring with them their crises. Now that's a bit of an extreme, but you have, the adulterous relationship going on. You have the staff member that's addicted to porn and hasn't told anybody. You have the drug addict that's one of your leaders, and it becomes a crisis you have to manage. And unfortunately, you can do it really well, and you can help them and serve them and all that. But the public perception then becomes, how could you even let this happen? This is supposed to be a holy place. I thought you all had it together. In our case, we had a campus pastor commit suicide, and the public narrative was, wait a second, if he can't make it through life, how can I? And so we had some big issues to deal with, not just why would he do that? What's going on there? What are you not telling us? But rather, can I even go on with my own life? So it became a point of ministry. But to answer your question, I think certainly post COVID, certainly with the anxiety and depression levels the way they are today, crisis is just a matter of time. And unfortunately, for a lot of us, we don't think about it until we're in it. And then we feel like, boy, the water's coming in quicker than I can bail. And I'm a little bit overwhelmed. The way that we have redeemed our pain is we share our story. My executive pastor and myself, um, the more we can tell the stories, the more we can share what we did wrong and what we did right, the more it feels like, boy, God is going to use this for something good. And that's my prayer for all your listeners.
Yeah, no, I love that, Rusty, and I love, your posture in that, because, your emphasis now. I mean, the drum that you're beating is, as ministry leaders, we need to prepare ourselves
Yeah.
for crisis. Like you said, you don't, if you wait until it hits, just like any crisis in life, if you're not prepared for it when it hits, then you're behind, and you're playing catch up, in the midst of, an environment that is chaotic oftentimes. So
Right.
so this whole idea of preparation, what are some of the things that you wished you would have known, as you encountered crisis? Things that you had to learn the hard way, that you're really trying to help others, get ahead of and be prepared for. What are some of those key lessons?
Yeah, I think I wish I would have learned how our staff and our team members, they view things differently than I do. Meaning, and one of the things we cover in this leading through crisis course is there's three different ways your staff and your key leaders think. They either think as family, they think as organization, or they think as cause. And you think about it right now, the people you work with the most, some of them are, boy, don't we all just love each other? And some of them are more, okay, who do I report to and who reports to me? And some are, you know what, forget org charts, forget your feelings. People are lost and going to hell. Let's get to work, you know? So when I stand up before our staff and share bad news, they all interpret it through that filter. For some, it was, oh no, you had to let somebody go. I feel so bad for them. Okay, how can I help that individual? For somebody else, it's all right, that's fine, but who do I report to now? And for somebody else, it's like, can we just get back to the main thing? So understanding how to tailor your message to meet all three of those demographics on your staff or even in your church, that would have been great to know. Another little thing that I had no idea, and the Bible college and seminary does not prepare you for how to handle the press. Because what happens is the press shows up if there's a crisis at your doorstep. And now, as a result of podcasts like The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill and other things like that, the public persona is every church is led by some kind of narcissist. And so we're just waiting for the shoe to drop. And so when something bad happens, they're just looking in, going, what's going on? What's the real issue? We had a guy just give us some great pointers on how to leverage the press, how to be ready for them when they show up, how to give them information, how to get to them before the story breaks, just little things like that. And now what happens is when something has come up in our community, for instance, well, when COVID hit, the news called us and said, how should the church respond? When there's a school shooting, we go to the press ahead of time and say, we're here for the community, and they get your message out for you. Little things like that that I had never thought of before. And then even some things of how do you deal with people that leave your church? It's such a painful thing, especially when you thought they were trusted friends. And one of the things that we've learned and we share is this idea of understanding where people sit in your congregation, and not everybody deserves the most amount of your time. And for many of us, we spend the most amount of our time with the people that are already convinced and are raving fans, when really we need to spend it with a little bit of the fringe people that will move towards that. And that's a whole nother nuance of how to manage people that I never thought of before, which really ends up helping mitigate some of those crises.
Yeah, so in that, are there some specific things that Rusty you would have done differently had you known some of these things? Can you think of some of those?
Yeah, my posture, because I fall in that organization circle, and I'm just thinking, okay, yeah, that happened, and that's awful, but I'll compartmentalize that and I'll grieve later. As the cliche is, ministry is a series of ungrieved losses. I'll just put that over here and I'll deal with that. But right now, the show must go on, and here's how we're going to manage this. I assumed everybody else would do that too. And so when I stood up and I communicated things on stage, like so and so has no longer on our staff, or this individual died by suicide, when those kind of information, pieces of information come out, there's this conspiracy theory in mind in all of us, especially post COVID, that we want to know why. What's really going on? What are they not telling us? This sounds like propaganda or fake news. Tell me what's really going on. I wish I would have shared more information than I did. I erred on the side of, you know what? Everything's okay. We're going to take care of his family. We're moving ahead. And I wish I would have shared, this guy had some really dark demons. And we uncovered some things that I'm not privy to tell you right now, but we're beginning to learn. And I don't have to tell everything, but you have to tell enough to know that I acknowledge it. I'm not acting like this guy was better than he really was, and kind of deal with that. I think churches tend to lean one way or the other. We say nothing and people make up their own story, or we say way too much and it becomes, wow, I thought you were a church of grace, and now you just thrown this guy and his family and everybody else under the bus. There is a middle line. I felt like we leaned too far on the saying nothing. I wish I would have done that differently.
Yeah, that's good. And it's interesting you bring that up, Rusty, because I do think that churches do tend to gravitate to one of those extremes when something crops up. And
Right.
my own personal experience, church I grew up in, I know there was a scandal with the lead pastor, and when I was like in middle and high school, and it was just pretty much not even mentioned. It was just like he was gone, and they just tried to not say anything and move on. Um, And so, I've seen that where they just try to, kind of avoid the conversation altogether. Or like you said, on the flip side, you just kind of all suddenly all these salacious details and all this, becomes almost a
Right.
big gossip zone. And it neither of those really serve the kingdom. So I think that middle way, as you mentioned, is a piece that is incredibly helpful. As we're looking at how do we honor God in the midst of this? How do we you know lead our people through this, because that's a big piece.
Hmm.
And then our witness in the community, and that's those pieces together are all combined in every crisis. So one of the things I want to ask you about, Rusty, is when it comes to the congregation, right? Because there are a lot of churches. A normal church in the U.S. is not a huge church, right? 200, 150, whatever that might be.
Right.
So that don't necessarily have a huge staff and those types of things. But every church has a congregation, right? Some are smaller, some are bigger, but every church has, every pastor has a flock that God has entrusted to them. And so when crisis occurs, Rusty, what are some of the key elements when it comes to being the pastor to your people in the midst of a situation where, again, you don't even know all the details, or you can't really share all the details, or shouldn't share all the details, but at the same time, you've got to shepherd these people God's entrusted to you.
Yeah. Somebody gave us a great metaphor during one of our crises situations, and that was, imagine yourself that you're standing in a pond, a lake, and a giant rock falls from the sky and hits the water. The closer you are to the impact zone, you feel a bigger splash. If you're at the shore, you're ankle deep, you probably don't know much. And for many of us, well, for all of us, when crisis hits, it depends on how close we were to the impact zone. And so you have to think about it kind of in these concentric circles. And it starts with, okay, how do I deal with those immediately impacted? In the case of a suicide, it was the family. And we had to sit down with a guy's kids and explain to them what their dad had done, and he's not coming home. And that was grueling. To have to walk, I had to call an individual's family from another state, his parents and sister, and tell them what their loved one had done, and he was gone. That's closest to the the splash zone. But then you kind of move further out. So it starts with the individual, and then it moves to maybe those closest to them, the staff. It could be even the leaders that worked with them. And so we had a meeting with those people immediately after one of these situations, and we had counselors already in the room. I broke the news and I said, I'm going to tell you everything I know. There are some things that I don't know yet, and there are some things that I know that I can't share yet, but we have counselors around ready to talk with you. The next step out was the congregation. Okay, so in this situation, we went to the press ahead of time. As soon as we found out the news and dealt with some of the family issues, we went to the press and said, "This story's about to break. You're going to find this out from the police, and we're going to give you the full story. We're asking you to wait a day so we can tell our congregation, because we have church on Thursday night. It's our first service of the weekend." So I said, "Let me tell my congregation first, and then I'll give you the whole story." And they said, "Deal." So I was able to communicate that to our church. We were able to put a message out on Facebook, and then the press broke from there. So I began to deal with the church. And here again, we began to say, if you need to talk to somebody, if you want to pray with somebody, we have people here for you. But then we began to deal with the community, because what this does is it brings up all of these feelings of, I had somebody that I knew that died by suicide, or suicide ideation. I've been thinking about committing suicide, and if this individual was a Christian and now you're telling me he still goes to heaven, why shouldn't I do this? So we brought in Kay Warren, who was just wonderful.
Mm.
And if anybody's dealing with this, kwarren.com has so many great resources to help people out dealing with suicide and the loss of somebody, but to deal with the community as they've dealt with these issues. And so you begin to kind of get out of the splash zone a little bit, but recognize that each of them have certain needs. And that's going to be this grief cycle that kind of comes and goes. It's not always just over in a few weeks. So allowing people to process it really became the helpful way to do that. And so we use that same methodology after a school shooting, even after the Vegas shooting that happened. I think it was like 5 years ago now. A lot of our, a lot of the people that were at that concert in Vegas where the gunman opened fire, weren't from Vegas. They were from other places. Many were from California, and some were from our community. And so, dealing with them through that process, and it just becomes all right, where are we in this impact zone, and how can we provide support?
Yeah, what's so interesting, Rusty, is that your church has, as has experienced some of these things, it is kind of taken a posture that um, these are ministry opportunities because these are moments of brokenness, and that's
Right.
what Christ came to heal our brokenness, right? And it's very, very I don't know, very interesting to step back and look because some churches have taken an approach to crisis as bury it and hope it never comes up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like because we don't want there to look like there's a stain on the bride of Christ type of approach, right? Um,
Yeah.
but it seems that you and your team, your church even, have really recognized that we live in a broken world. That, as you said, the enemy is at work, trying to cripple the church and cripple the testimony of the church. But you viewed it as it seems, not that we're not trying to polish everything up and make everyone think everything's all right, but we're going to step in and say, no, the world is broken, and this is exactly why we all need Jesus, and this is exactly why our church is here in this community.
Yeah. Unfortunately, not everybody's going to see it that way. They're going to take their shots at you. They're going to say, "Well, look at all the problems they've got." But at the end of the day, they know they've got problems too. You
Mm,
just look at the New Testament, man, it's just filled with broken people. And they didn't leave out the fact that Judas took his life,
right.
and that Peter said stupid things, and Paul and Peter got into it. It's just there. And I think what's happened is we really have become the church for people with any kind of brokenness because we're the quickest to admit our own. That's difficult for your older church members that have maybe, kind of lived with a don't ask, don't tell mentality. We don't bring up that kind of stuff. We're the bride of Christ. Jesus is all we talk about, just that kind of mentality. But the reality is, I mean, Jesus was among the broken, and we hear about, the difficult things he dealt with, and even in his own weeping at Lazarus' grave. So we just decided to lean into this is who we are. We don't always get things right, but we know that we have a perfect Father, and He loves us, and He will redeem all things. Everything does not happen for a reason, but everything can be redeemed. So let's move towards that. And obviously, there have been some people that have left us that have moved on. We're not holy enough for them. Okay, I'm glad they're going to heaven. I'm glad heaven's big too. So I'll stay away from them. But the reality is, we want to just swing wide that door for people that are hurting and broken. And I think that's become what's happened.
Yeah, no, that's good, and I think just a reminder for any church, no matter how big, how small, that goes through a crisis, that again, those opportunities can be redeemed, and you have the opportunity to you know meet people in their brokenness because of the brokenness that you guys are experiencing as well, right?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Jason, that, the reality is everything comes to light. It just does. And that's biblical too. What's done in the darkness will be brought to light. But even think about in our culture, everybody's got a phone and got a social media account, and they're just looking for dirt. So the quicker you address it and get it out there, the more it speaks to your benefit because you're not trying to hide anything. This is just who we are. This is what we're dealing with. If you have questions, here's who you talk to. Have a point person that can answer those questions and roll with it. It will definitely limit some of the crisis. Last thing I would say about that is this: I heard a seasoned pastor say one time, the life cycle of drama in your church is 2 weeks, because 2 weeks is as long as people can go before they have to get back to their own drama. And he was dead on. I mean, we almost set our calendar by it now. This happened. Okay. Weather it 2 weeks. It's almost 14 days to the day when people just move on because there's just something new and they got to get back to their own stuff.
That's interesting. Human nature is interesting, isn't it?
It
Yeah,
really
yeah.
is.
So Rusty, with all of the experiences you've had, you and your team have put together some resources because, like you
Yeah.
said, your heart now is, your heart's for your community, your ministering, your gospel advancing church in your community, but you want to steward the experiences that your church has had. in a way that honors God and helps build the kingdom. And so you have actually taken the time to think through and process through all of these different experiences that your church has had to create a resource for other churches. So talk to us a little bit about that resource, because I just love how you are allowing God to use this in such a cool way.
Yeah, soon after some of these crises happened, what I noticed was there were other churches out there dealing with this that would call me up and say, "Hey, can you help me navigate this?" And I remember soon after our school shooting, somebody from Sandy Hook called me and said, "Let me tell you what we learned." Oh, it was so helpful. So I thought the more we can get this out to people, the better. So we put together a 12 episode video course, just short little TED Talks of here's what we did right, here's what we did wrong, here's what we do different, here's some resources for you. For instance, here's a sheet on how to deal with the press. Here's a great little tool you can use with your staff. Here's something you can use with your leaders. Here's a way to look at people in your church to know who needs more time and who needs less. Just a lot of practical tools we wanted to put in people's hands to help them navigate everything from an internal crisis to a crisis on staff to a crisis in the church to a crisis in the community. We even talk about the loss of an icon in your community. For us, it was Kobe Bryant and his death that rocked Southern California and all Laker fans. That's a big part of our population. How do you honor somebody who's not always that honorable? So everybody's going to deal with something like that in their community. We walk through all of those things. So the course is called Leading Through Crisis Without Becoming One. We have a free compilation video. You can watch some of the highlights of the course to get a feel for, is this for you? You can just get that at my website, pastorrustygeorge.com. And if you're interested in purchasing the course, we're going to give it to all of your viewers for 30 days for half off if they just use the code PastorServe. They just type that in, and that will give us a way of knowing that it came from you. We'll give it to them half off. And my hope is that it helps you. And if you want to do a deeper dive or want to call me up or our executive pastor and have us work with your staff or with you, we're happy to do that as well. And all that information is on there. So just go to pastorrustygeorge.com for all of that information.
Awesome, man. And we certainly appreciate that generosity for our viewers, brother, and all the work that you have put into really processing, again, through your experiences and saying, okay, now how can we use this to benefit the kingdom? So we love that. And all the links, all the things that Rusty and I are talking about, you can find in the toolkit for this episode. You can find that at pastorserve.org/network, and we'll have resource links and all that stuff, so you don't have to remember everything that Rusty just said. But we'll have it all for you because we want you guys to avail yourselves of this opportunity, and certainly appreciate that. Rusty, as we are winding down, I can only imagine that there are pastors right now watching, ministry leaders right now who are listening, who are in the depth of a crisis. And brother, I wanted to give you just an opportunity to speak into their lives.
This too shall pass. It sucks right now. It hurts. It's dark. You think, this is not why I got into this. Where is God? Is my calling finished? Did I do something wrong? Has he left me? It will be in this season you grow the most. It will be in this season you'll feel closer to God than ever before. Just keep going. A pastor friend of mine who was in pastoring for 40 years said to me one time, Rusty, sometimes the only way I could show Jesus I loved him was just to get out of bed in the morning. And sometimes that's all you can do, but it will get better. As a friend of mine sent me a passage of scripture from Lamentations when we were going through one of our crises, and it just simply said, I will never forget this awful time, but I do believe your joy comes in the morning, and the blessings are new each day. And out of this, God will bring some of your greatest fruit. It'll be tough, but it will end.
Yeah, I love that. Good word, brother. Rusty, thank you so much for making time to be with us. Certainly appreciate your openness and willingness to share from your heart and from your experiences.
Thank you, Jason. Always love talking with you, and love what PastorServe has been doing for years, helping out so many pastors. Grateful for you and all the people there.
Awesome. Thank you, brother. God bless you.
You too.
Now, before you go, I want to remind you of an incredible free resource that our team puts together every single week to help you and your team dig more deeply and maximize the conversation that we just had. This is the weekly toolkit that we provide, and we understand that it's one thing to listen or watch an episode, but it's something entirely different to actually take what you've heard, what you've watched, what you've seen, and apply it to your life and to your ministry. You see, FrontStage BackStage is more than just a podcast or YouTube show about ministry leadership. We are a complete resource to help train you and your entire ministry team as you seek to grow and develop in life and ministry. Every single week, we provide a weekly toolkit, which has all types of tools in it to help you do just that. Now, you can find this at pastorserve.org/network. That's pastorserve.org/network. And there you'll find all of our shows, all of our episodes, and all of our weekly toolkits. Now, inside the toolkit are several tools, including video links and audio links for you to share with your team. There are resource links about different resources and tools that were mentioned in the conversation, several other tools, but the greatest thing is the Ministry Leaders Growth Guide. Our team pulls key insights and concepts from every conversation with our amazing guests. And then we also create engaging questions for you and your team to consider and process, providing space for you to reflect on how that episode's topic relates to your unique context at your local church, in your ministry, and in your life. Now, you can use these questions in your regular staff meetings to guide your conversation as you invest in the growth of your ministry leaders. You can find the weekly toolkit at pastorserve.org/network. We encourage you to check out that free resource. Until next time, I'm Jason Daye, encouraging you to love well, live well, and lead well. God bless.